showing what they think of the EU far-right activists.
What you just witnessed was a mass protest where the EU flag was burned. You'd think this was a video from the United Kingdom, the only nation in the European Union's history that's evoked Article 50, right? But you'd be wrong. Here's another video of a massive protest where protesters were calling on their nation's government to withdraw from the European Union in 2016. Again, this video is not from the United Kingdom. The first clip was from Hungary, the second was from Poland, two nations that joined the EU in 2004 at a time when Eurosceptic sentiments were at an all-time high. However, according to the latest statistics from 2022, Hungarian and Polish respondents claimed that they believed the EU had several qualities that benefited their nations. You'll notice that almost everyone agrees that the EU promotes peace and democratic values and respects the country's individuality. Quite clearly, it seems like Hungarians and Polish people have had a change of heart. Now, this video is from the United Kingdom. That's right, in this clip from 2024, people aren't celebrating the UK's withdrawal from the EU, they're protesting against it. Several hundreds of people took to the streets to call on the government to rejoin the Union. Since Brexit, there's one thing that Hungarians, Poles, Britons, and frankly every member of the remaining EU 27 can agree with: Brexit was the wrong choice. The only silver lining here was that it took the UK to leave the Union so that other member states could recognise its importance. Call it a domino effect, if you will, with Euroscepticism falling one by one. Over 1,000 people attended a Frexit rally in October 2023, but this number doesn't necessarily mean anything. Why? Because just a few days later, over 105,000 people attended an anti-Semitism rally, 15,000 people attended a pro-Palestine rally, and 56,000 people attended the Paris Pride event. Yes, Frexit is something that comes up from time to time, but the support is equivalent to a drop of water in the ocean. France's hypothetical exit from the EU, Frexit, used to be a popular term. If anything, the French term gained prominence long before Brexit was ever a thing. According to a 2016 poll conducted by Pew Research Centre, 61% of the French population held an unfavourable view of the EU, second only to Greece, where 71% believed EU membership was not in their best interest. The UK's on there too, obviously, with 48% holding an unfavourable view, similar to Germany and Spain. The 2016 graph, predating the UK's withdrawal from the EU, establishes one thing: Euroscepticism was on the rise among member nations. Then, in 2019, the study was repeated, and now 60% of the French population believed that it was in their best interest to stay in the League. What happened? In 2024, ahead of France's national elections, then Prime Minister Gabriel Attal cautioned voters against voting for Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party. During a conference, he claimed that France would regret its support for Le Pen, principally as the far-right candidate was a strong advocate for Frexit. He claimed that the French would thereafter be left in a similar state to Britons, who have been crying over Brexit. Le Pen didn't win, unsurprisingly, and that had a lot to do with the fact that France had changed its narrative from supporting an EU withdrawal to wanting anything but that. It goes without saying that Euroscepticism still exists in France, as it does in any EU 27 nation. However, in the several years since the UK evoked Article 50, no other nation has taken its lead. George Papakonstantinou, Greece's former finance minister, shared a similar opinion as Attal. However, he claimed that one of the reasons why there'd been flattering support for Greece's exit was because they'd witnessed in real time just how much of a mess Brexit really was. While the referendum was held in 2016, it took the House of Commons another 4 years to actually leave the Union. 4 years and 3 prime ministers. David Cameron announced an in-out referendum deciding the fate of the UK in the EU would be held in 2013. At the time, his announcement came with a quid pro quo of sorts. To have that referendum, the public would have to elect the Conservative Party into governance again. The public held up their end of the bargain, and now it was time for Cameron to hold up his end. While a supporter of the EU himself, Cameron announced that the referendum would be held in 2016. Promptly after the majority voted to leave the EU, he resigned from office. Theresa May took charge and was tasked with working out the EU-UK divorce deal. This took longer than many Britons had expected, with the House of Commons being adjourned every other time because of the aggressive screaming matches that erupted every time negotiations were read. Brexit was never anticipated as being an easy way out, but no one thought it'd be this hard either. May resigned when she realised she couldn't work out a satisfactory deal for the House of Commons, and Boris Johnson took over. As a champion of the Leave campaign, he vowed to see Brexit through. To his credit, he did just that in 2020, well, 2021, if you consider the fact that 2020 only initiated the transitional process. Altogether, it took the British several years and several bargaining chips to finally make Brexit a reality. What Atal and Papakonstantinou were implying wasn't the fact that Frexit or Dexit couldn't happen, but that the process was so gut-wrenchingly draining for the public that they wished they'd never initiated it. Not only that, but as a nation in Europe, it was virtually impossible for the UK to exit the EU free and clear. It had to work out terms on what was to come next in EU-UK relations. The Northern Ireland Protocol, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, and several treaties governed how the UK and the EU would conduct business from here on. A country which prides itself as having an extremely robust parliamentary system suddenly finds itself completely adrift, said Papakonstantinou. But just the fact that it would be a long and draining process isn't reason enough for Euroscepticism to decline across member nations. According to experts, support for the EU has grown because of support for unions as a whole. For example, EU member states face significant challenges during the global financial crisis, with countries such as Ireland, Spain and Portugal struggling to manage their own governmental debt. Then, following the COVID-19 pandemic, member states looked towards a common solution or relief of some kind. That came in the form of the EU. Which country will take Great Britain's lead and exit the European Union next? According to Nigel Farage, a champion of the Leave campaign, he saw a strong likelihood that the Netherlands would be next in line. In 2016, he stated that now that the UK had taken its first step, Nexit would be the next withdrawal. Farage had originally stated that every member state would leave sooner or later, claiming that the EU was dying. To be fair to the political leader, his statements didn't come out of thin air. In 2016, Geert Wilders' Freedom Party, a far-right political party that opposed the EU, was gaining momentum in Dutch politics. One of the things that Wilders had promised was a referendum of their own. But it's been several years to the day and no such referendum has been held. Will it ever be held? It's unlikely. Even back in 2016, when Farage made the bold claims, a national poll showed that there was a slim majority that opposed holding a referendum and an equally slim majority that opposed leaving the EU. The Dutch political landscape was predominantly pro-EU, with Eurosceptic sentiments being a minority view. While the Dutch Eurosceptic Freedom Party expressed support for the UK's decision, the broader Dutch political consensus remained in favour of EU membership. Wilders congratulated the UK for securing their Independence Day, but his party's influence was insufficient to shift the national position toward leaving the EU. The Netherlands' strong economic ties with the EU, particularly through its significant export sector, reinforced the country's commitment to EU membership. For instance, Dutch Finance Minister Jeroen Dijsselbloem emphasised that the Netherlands' interest in the internal market were even larger than those of the UK, highlighting the importance of EU membership for Dutch economic prosperity. Public opinion in the Netherlands remains largely supportive of EU membership. At the time, a 2016 Maurice de Haan survey indicated that 53% were against such a vote. You see, prior to Brexit, the Netherlands had no significant inclination to leave the EU. Brexit did not substantially alter this stance. Instead, it highlighted the benefits of EU membership, leading to a diminished likelihood of the Netherlands pursuing an exit. What about Italexit? After the results of the June 2016 Brexit referendum were read, Matteo Salvini of the anti-immigration Northern League tweeted, "Hurrah for the courage of free citizens. Heart, brain and pride defeated lies, threats and blackmail. Thank you, UK. Now it's our turn." Northern League, Lega Nord, a party founded in 1991 that initially advocated for the transformation of Italy into a federal state, emphasising the fiscal federalism and regional autonomy, particularly for northern regions. Quite clearly, Salvini believed that Italy should take the next step in evoking Article 50. Then how come he didn't bring that plan into fruition? You see, Lega Nord's support has fluctuated over the years. In the 2018 general election, Lega secured 17.4% of the vote, becoming the third largest party in the Italian parliament. However, by the 2022 general election, support for Lega had declined, reflecting the challenges the party faces in maintaining its voter base. Meanwhile, then President of Italy, Matteo Renzi, had asked Westminster to reconsider their decision to withdraw. Now, Renzi wasn't an EU apologist by any means, but he did believe that it was more beneficial for Italy and, by extension, the United Kingdom to choose to remain in the EU. He wasn't alone. Together with leaders of the Big Four, several leaders of state asked the UK to reconsider. Who are the Big Four? Italy, Germany, France and Spain are considered the Big Four of the EU and likewise strong economies in Europe as a whole. In 2020, following Boris Johnson's success in negotiating an exit deal with Brussels, Redfield and Wilton Strategies conducted a poll, asking 1,500 respondents from each of the Big Four if they believe their nation should follow suit. Here are the results. You can see the support for another exit came predominantly from Italy, wherein almost half the population believed that if Brexit proved to be successful, Italy should hold a referendum too. France came next, followed by Spain and lastly Germany, with support for withdrawal dwindling in each nation. However, in the years since Brexit has happened, Italy has not yet had a referendum of its own. Why? The answer lies in the question the Redfield and Wilton Strategy survey asked respondents. Would you want to leave if Brexit is successful? The success of the UK's decision was the motivating factor here. You have to understand that while Eurosceptics came in every member state applauding for the UK's undertaking of such a huge decision, they weren't going to up and leave the very next day. If anything, the UK gave them something they'd been preying on. An example. Gianluigi Paragoni, a former five-star movement senator, founded the Italexit party in 2020, explicitly advocating for Italy's withdrawal from the EU. Despite this, hard Euroscepticism has not seen a significant rise in support since Brexit. Conversely, soft Euroscepticism has grown, with support increasing from around 7% to 27% between 2016 and 2022. While parties like Italexit remain on the fringes, mainstream political entities have adopted a more moderate stance. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, for instance, has emphasised the need for the EU to focus on internal issues such as tariffs, competitiveness and defence, advocating for reforms rather than withdrawal. Moving on to another member of the Big Four, one which experienced somewhat of a paradoxical shift since Brexit happened. No, Dexit still isn't happening, not anytime soon at least. However, the Alternative for Deutschland, founded in 2013, has been at the forefront of promoting Euroscepticism in Germany. Over time, the AfD has intensified its criticism of the EU, evolving from soft Euroscepticism, opposing specific EU policies, to a more hardline stance, including advocating for Germany's withdrawal from the EU if significant reforms are not achieved. This shift was evidenced during the 2021 party conference in Dresden, where a majority of AfD members voted to include the possibility of evoking Article 50 in their manifesto. The AfD is a right-wing party, a categorization that wouldn't surprise many people when they learn of its Eurosceptic approach. By contrast, Bündnissaare Wagenknecht, or BSW, is a left-wing party that's also calling on Dexit. Historically, left-wing political campaigns are more likely to favour remaining in the EU rather than withdrawing from it. This obviously wasn't the case in the UK from 2016 through 2020, where the Labour Party, although didn't put up a hardline stand against the EU, didn't necessarily stand in favour of it either. But an interesting thing to note here is that both AfD, BSW and even the Labour Party share some common ground: reform before withdrawing. German Eurosceptic leaders have promised that a referendum would be held provided the EU didn't come up with solutions for their grievances. In this case, BSW, for example, claims that the EU's biggest problem is twofold: uncontrolled migration and the Russo-Ukrainian war. Despite these developments, Germany remains fundamentally pro-EU. A 2024 study indicated that while Brexit demonstrated the possibility of a member state leaving the EU, it also served as a cautionary tale, muting some Eurosceptic voices within Germany. Far-right parties in Europe have largely shifted their focus away from advocating for EU exit, now prioritising issues like immigration to attract mainstream voters. While many remain Eurosceptic, the push to leave the bloc has been toned down. While the Freedom Party's National Manifesto once called for a referendum on leaving the EU, Wilders' demand is notably absent from the party's European platform. Still, the party remains highly critical of EU policies, opposing further integration and denouncing Brussels bureaucracy and environmental regulations. Likewise, France's National Rally leader Jordan Bardella rejected accusations of supporting Frexit. Like Wilders, he pointed to the successes of like-minded parties across Europe that have changed their stance. Rather than exiting, they're seeking to reshape the EU from within. Meanwhile, in Germany, the AfD went from drawing the line in stone to sand. The party has recently softened its stance, viewing Dexit as a last resort. Brexit trailblazed, but not in the way the Leave campaign had hoped. Instead, it serves as a stark reminder to other nations why it's in their best interests not to exit the European Union.